Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for social justice and collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you for joining us today.
For those new to our podcast, Interdependent Study is meant to be a space and community for folks who believe in and want to do the work of social justice.
Each week, we'll bring something new to the table, discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lens of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
Yes, we want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. That's what we like to do around here. Aaron, you're up this week. What have you brought to the table today?
I am. So I'm bringing a discussion guide from Interrupting Criminalization called Abolition the State, which is designed to help abolitionists think through how they want to relate to the state. We talked about it a few weeks back when we read an article on the Forge Organizing website called What Time Is It on the Clock of Abolitionist Organizing by Andrea Ritchie. And this guide builds on some of that. I don't remember which one came first.
Right.
But they're connected.
Yep.
But this guide sets some context for why this kind of a conversation exists, like moving beyond ideological debates between socialism, communism, and anarchism. It uses a variety of definitions of nation state and some other key terms to create shared language for these discussions.
Right.
That's kind of how it opens up. And then it gets to questions and activities. There's a section where we were asked to list all of the functions that the state currently performs and then reflect on whether we want the state to continue to perform those functions or how we want those functions to continue to be performed without some form of policing, because there's so much policing in so many forms of the state institutions and the functions of the state.
Yes.
And there's a lot of great quotations that set the context for the discussion questions from a variety of thinkers and people who we've talked about here on the podcast and referenced. And so, yeah, it was just a really great discussion guide that I'm excited to talk more about with you right here.
Yeah, this was like such an incredible resource and tool, I think, for all of us, but especially for abolitionists and organizers who are engaged in this work and, you know, the folks who are trying to have real discussions about how we might or might not work within current state structure and systems that we know now, that we have now, and to help make tangible decisions about how we can and should move forward. And so I really appreciated how they framed this discussion tool as an invitation to and for organizers to work together, I think, to engage with all of the amazing questions that they pose. I mean, they were such thoughtful questions. And really they frame it as this idea of moving beyond debates, moving beyond discussions, as you say, to ultimately get to decisions and actions. That's the key of this, I think. That was sort of their main point with this guide. And so I think in that way, that made this such a valuable and useful tool because of that movement towards action. The other thing I'll say that I appreciated, and I think they say this early on in the introduction, this idea that abolitionists don't have to agree, but they make it clear the imperative is that we have to engage in this work to move toward action. And so I was just really excited to see everything that was in this. I thought it was just so well crafted and constructed and done. And, you know, it's sort of, to me, everything made sense when I thought about the order of the questions and the way that it was laid out and the activities that, you know, they wanted us to engage in. So, I mean, just a huge kudos to Interrupting Criminalization and the folks there for producing such an incredible resource.
Yeah, the curriculum design nerd in me, I was like, oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah, well done.
Builds, it's scaffolded, it's awesome.
Yes.
And I think to build on what you said, one of the things I really appreciated about is how it points out that there are, as you said, no clear answer. There's not one single answer for any of these questions. And so they say, quote, no universally agreed upon answers or responses to these questions. To the contrary, there is a diversity of perspectives about which forms of governance and what relationships to state power, state institutions, and levels of state government get us closer to the world we want.
Right.
Because there's so much difference in how we can get to the future that actually meets all of our needs.
Yep.
So I wanted to pose just a couple of those questions to give a sense of how there are many different ways to pursue a society beyond a carceral state that they use in the guide, which is 30-ish pages.
Yep.
And so there are lots of different questions, and these are just two of them. So the first one, how can we extract power and resources from the carceral state by organizing to defund and divest from carceral institutions and avoiding organizing strategies that empower and legitimize the carceral state? Lots of different ways to go about that.
Yes.
Lots of different visions that people might have for what that looks like, both in the near term and the long term.
Right.
The next question, what is power? Can we be there for each other without holding power over one another? And I think that's another great question to think about, because how often power has been set up in our society has been hierarchical.
Right.
And so people are holding power over us in some form or fashion.
Yes.
Whether that is like legitimately power, this isn't legitimate power, but whether it's power that is literal threats of physical violence, or if it's power in some other form or fashion of there being consequences to your actions in some way.
Right.
There being sort of coercion in manipulating your behavior so that you fall into line of what people expect of you, what the carceral state expects of you.
Yes.
And so there's lots of different ways that power could exist that is shared, that is horizontal. And that's another great question for us to consider as we're moving forward toward the world that we actually want.
Yeah, and I think, again, that speaks to, those are two great questions that you pulled, and just thinking about the way in which they're written. They're so, I think, brilliantly written to really get you engaged in, you know, what the root of the issues are, and not just like a surface level easy question. Like, there are no easy questions here because there are no easy solutions to this. And so those are two great questions that they ask. And I think that, again, just showcases why this is a really thoughtful tool to engage with and work with for folks to figure out what's really possible. I mean, going back out, you know, before even those two questions, the very first question in this book is, in this tool, I should say, is how do you define the state? And I think one of the things I loved about this, though, is that they provide, and I think you said this at the top, right? They provide so many examples of definitions of the state by other abolitionists, other organizers, other scholars. And I think that's helpful to help clarify your own analysis, your own potential response to that question. Or if, you know, you really are kind of stuck and don't know where to start, like, there's so many great definitions there. And so I think that's super helpful, like a super helpful part of this resource. And to your, you know, the quote that you pulled, like, because there's no universal approach to abolition and what should be, that means there's certainly no one clear answer to that question or either questions you asked. So, again, I love as you talked about the scaffolding, the curriculum, the starting with how do you define the state, so we can have this in-depth exploration and analysis. You know, folks engaged in this can have this thoughtful analysis about abolition in this way. You know, the tool, I think, then goes on to ask folks to think about and consider the functions of the state, to think about whether or not the state should perform those functions, and then if not, who should perform those functions and provide those services. When you talk about sort of the power that's in the state, and should that be the case? I think the other thing that it makes you think about is how real people are involved in the administration of those services and those functions, and how should people benefit from them. So yeah, I just really appreciated the questions, the activities. There was room to dive into that, to think about that in that 30 pages. And so for me, this tool is so useful and worth taking the time to go through for anyone engaged in this work. Yeah,
definitely. And I think, there's so many great questions and activities for people to reflect on their own thought process, as you said, and their own way that they might relate to abolitionist organizing or an abolitionist world beyond what we currently have.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some good usefulness of this for all of us. Absolutely, individually and collectively, and as part of organizations as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that I really appreciated was this framework that was mentioned toward the end, I think. It has been popularized in the U.S. by Mi Gente. And they talk about moving within, against, and beyond the state. So beyond means, quote, understanding in our bones that the state is not a legitimate mediator between us and the land, each other, our livelihoods, or our belonging. Against means defending our wins and the dignity of our people. And within means using the mechanisms of the state to protect and build the power of the people. And so I really appreciated this framework because it seems contradictory on the surface.
It does.
How do you hold all these things at once?
Yeah.
But, truths are complex
Yes.
in a lot of ways. And so as you consider the complexities of trying to move toward abolition, you can see, as Interrupting Criminalization mentions throughout this toolkit, there are many ways to get there, and not everything has to be completely thrown away when we think about what it is that the state does and the functions that it performs.
Right.
And we can do these things simultaneously where we're with, against, and beyond. And we can gain control of an institution while also protecting ourselves and our communities from other parts of the state, all while we understand that the way that the state has trained us to interact with one another, interact with our neighbors, interact with our family members even,
Yes.
isn't legitimate. And I think ties back into that hierarchical power and philosophy.
Yeah, mindset, whatever.
And we can find ways to have power with instead of having power over. And this gets to all of those kind of things, I
Right.
think, when you really apply that framework to a lot of different things.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such a brilliant framework, and it seems, as you said, contradictory. It also seems so simple, though, when you really dive into it and think about it. And one of the things I appreciated about it, I think obviously all three prongs of this framework need to be used in conjunction with each other. But this idea, the against one, defending our wins, and the dignity of our people, like this idea of our humanity and protecting that at all costs and fighting for that. I mean, to me, there is nothing more important than that. I appreciated reading about that framework. I don't think I've seen it anywhere else.
I don't know if I have yet either.
Yeah.
One of the things I mentioned too is you talked about the three prongs needing to be interactive with one another. One of the warnings they give is that if there's too much emphasis on within the state, then some of the other things fall away.
Yes.
And so I appreciated that too, of recognizing, movements get co-opted frequently when they move into operating within a state framework. And then the goals of that movement don't get achieved because they have to occur within the current system. This is like we talked about with class struggle unionism last week. You can't get to where we want to go sometimes within the frameworks that exist right now. And so we have to operate beyond those things and find ways to create things and systems and institutions and organizations and what have you beyond the current norms, beyond the current thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that, again, I think speaks to why this tool is so great, and sort of the usefulness of the frameworks and examples and quotes that were provided in this. I think they are helpful context as you engage in the questions and the activities. So I'm glad you brought that up. One of the quotes that I it's a little bit of a long quote, but I really enjoyed it and I appreciated it. It's this quote from Jacqueline Wang, who's the author of the 2018 book, Carceral Capitalism. And I don't think I've seen this before. I certainly haven't read this book, but I wanted to share this quote, so bear with me. Quote, "Part of me believes the state will always be repressive and should be overthrown. Part of me thinks if we are stuck with the state, we should demand Medicare for all, social housing, free college, the cancellation of student debt, and so forth. The anarchist part of me thinks we should abolish the family. The pragmatist thinks that cash payments to families could go a long way in ending child poverty. The pragmatist thinks a federal jobs guarantee could help a lot of people. The anarchist retorts that we should abolish work itself. The anarchist part of me believes that mutual aid is necessary for building collective social bonds, for experimenting with new forms of life and modes of being together, modeled on community and care. The pragmatist replies that not everything can be solved with mutual aid, given the level of investment required to address environmental racism and upgrade our crumbling toxic infrastructure. For me, the ultimate aim of the abolition of the state as it currently exists. At the same time, I support organized provisioning of public goods, though I reject the surveillance component of the welfare state." So that's this long quote, and for me, I think this quote is so great because it shows the wide-ranging thinking and possibilities when we're engaging in conversations about what is possible through abolition. It gives us this quote alone gives us potential ideas and solutions to work with and to think about what could be possible if we enact them in our society. And it shows us like a practical example of what it looks like to engage with a discussion tool like this one, right? If you answer the questions, you might come up with a long paragraph or a bullet pointed list of lots of ideas that you can work through and work to implement and try them. That's one of the cruxes of abolition, like trying new things to get us out of our current structures. So there was something about that quote, this statements and replies to statements, retorts to statements, that I appreciated as showcasing what is possible when you truly engage with a tool like this.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think I highlighted that one too. And
Yes.
so, look, just because the way that it breaks down, okay, this is the pragmatist version of what I think we can achieve right now, but long term, is that what I actually want? And
Exactly.
there's so much nuance in all of that I think that this discussion guide pulls out of you. If you actually engage with it and answer the questions and think about these things, it really gets into the weeds of all of that stuff.
Absolutely. Right? And shows us, I think, that it's okay for that to happen.
Yeah.
Right? It is okay for that to happen.
Because it's a reality.
Absolutely. And the reality is complicated. And so we need solutions that help us address the complicated nature in which we live.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
All right. Well, let's talk about application. I
Okay.
think it is time.
It's time.
How does this discussion guide apply to our day-to-day lives? The application in this discussion guide for me is all about how we navigate the things that exist currently while simultaneously dreaming of and experimenting toward a future that meets all of our needs.
Absolutely.
We have to figure out how to mold some of these institutions that we currently have to meet our needs now. And those things might be, public education,
right,
or the forms of public health care that we have, the things that are sort of caregiving.
Yes.
How do we shape those to be something that we continue to want and that leave behind the pieces of the carceral state that we don't want anymore? And then how do we take away power from institutions that actually do harm to people?
Right.
Policing, prisons, all kinds of things related to that power structure. And this is an in-between process.
Yes.
This isn't like flipping on a light switch. There's many light switches to flip on in the process of getting to a place where we no longer have police. And it's going to require creativity and imagination and experiments, as you alluded to, and discussion and, arguments with other people in the struggle. And those arguments and people having different visions, that's all important to discuss, because then most likely on the other end of that we'll have something even better than any one person could dream up.
Absolutely.
And so that's my application, is that we have to struggle with what is current and where we want to go, and figure out how we can do all that together.
I love that. And do it in a way that, as you say, honors the caretaking that we need. And as this guide alluded to as well, care and community, like centering the community in it as well. That's great application. I think this is one of those situations where the thing is the application.
Yeah,
right?
this is the application.
This is the application. The tool is designed to be used to help us develop the application, and the applications of our conversations and our thinking and our dreaming, as you said, about abolition and about what that could look like in reality in our world. The very last page of this tool poses the final question. And the question is, how do our responses shape what we do now? And it invites abolitionists who have used this tool, who have done the work, to make a list of their current organizing strategies and demands, and then outline how they align with their responses to the questions throughout the tool. And so for me, the application here is just the practicality of this tool. And I think the fact that if you engage with it, you'll be left with tangible ideas and actions to move on, which is pretty incredible. And I love, and I want to honor your point earlier about how I think this can be done individually for us as people, but also certainly I know they designed this to be a helpful tool for organizers as well. So
and for people to think about together.
Yes. So the thing is the application. I love it. I love when that happens.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about homework.
Okay.
Since the thing is the application,
yes,
we can move on to homework. How do we want to continue learning about our conversation today? My homework is directly from page 19 of this toolkit, of this discussion guide. The question at the bottom of the page is, quote, what forms of governance exist beyond the global North carceral nation state. And I don't know much about that.
That's like big question.
Yeah, there's little bits and pieces that I kind of know that I've picked up, but it'd be great to learn more about these as a way to continue my own political education for creating small experiments that get us a tiny bit closer to an abolitionist future, because it's one small step at a time in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Let's do it. All right, so I've got a lot of ideas here. One piece of homework that I want to do, we're gonna do it pretty immediately. I'm gonna hint at that in a second here. I also want to engage with the long list of resources that are both used and cited in this tool, because there's definitely a few that I haven't read or watched. There's some videos linked as well. So I want to continue to engage and learn with new resources about abolition that we haven't engaged with. One of those is that cited resource that I mentioned earlier that I'm really particularly intrigued by, the book Carceral Capitalism by Jackie Wang, which I looked up earlier today. It's a collection of essays about the topic. I just really appreciate it. There's a few quotes by her in this tool, and I appreciated all of them. And so I think reading from and learning from her would be pretty fantastic. So I want to add her to the list and just dive into any of the resources that I'm unfamiliar with, that we haven't brought to the table here, because there's more learning to do.
Not always.
Absolutely.
Always. Well, speaking of, you're up next time, Damien. What do you bring it to the table in our next episode? I hear that you've already alluded to it.
I did.
Maybe I did last week.
And maybe you did too. Yeah, you really were the spoiler alert in this. I'm going to bring one of the follow-up zines to this discussion tool that Interrupting Criminalization released back in September of this year. So it's called Abolition and the State, Responses, Volume 1. And so here's how Interrupting Criminalization described the zine in their introduction. So, quote, "This is the first in a series of zines engaging questions raised in Interrupting Criminalization's Abolition and the State, a discussion guide. Our hope in creating this discussion guide was that it would spark and fuel engagement, debate, and sharpened analysis among abolitionist organizers around the role of the state in bringing about and sustaining abolitionist futures. As emphasized in the discussion guide, these are not merely esoteric or theoretical questions focused on some faraway future. They shape our demands, organizing, and practice in the now. Whether we are fighting for police-free schools, demanding universal, accessible, quality education, housing, or healthcare, or struggling for climate justice and the future of life on this planet, we quickly run into questions about how to achieve our visions for sustainable and liberatory communities." So yeah, I'm super excited to continue this conversation and to continue to engage with the tool itself, but also this follow-up zine and just these incredible resources that Interrupting Criminalization continues to produce. And I'm sure that there's going to be opportunities for us to engage with some of the questions that they actually pose in the zine. So I'm super excited to bring it to the table.
Yeah, and it looks like the zine is pulling from a couple different conversations that actually happen between people about the questions.
Yes.
So we're going to get to see some people's thoughts about the questions that are posed in the original discussion guide. So I'm looking forward to reading that and digging into that right here.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's it for this week. So we want to thank you for joining us today and for listening to Interdependent Study. You know what I'm going to ask you to do, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating or review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media. Check us out on YouTube. Sign up for our email list to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about us. We'll talk to you next time.